Okay, so this is going to be a breakdown video, and as you can see, it's quite a large one. This is a complex terrain, so a lot more detailed than some of the other ones that I've gone through. So there's quite a lot going on here, which means there's quite a lot to actually go through in order to really understand the intentions and the process. So we'll start at the basics and we'll work our way through and see how it goes. I'm just going to reset a lot of this stuff that I've just adjusted to the defaults. That I did to make it look pretty. And we're going to start all the way down here at the beginning. If you want to follow along, you can pause and create what I've created. So starting off with a purlin, I went with a billowy and I wanted to adjust the scale. So what I'm looking for is a lot of different forms. I want a lot of different kind of bulbous shapes. I also wanted to add a little bit of extra complexity to this, so I wanted to combine it with an FBM version, which is going to give me sort of like a dirt, crunchy kind of feel. And combined together, they give us this. So it's just a 50-50 blend, nothing more than that. Now, my overall plan for this is to have enough complexity that erosion will give me a lot of little details. This is one of the key elements to what I'm about to do. If you have lots of little crevices and areas that things can simulate through, then you'll get more detail overall. The key thing here is that if I do just it as is, right? Notice these steep slopes. The steep slopes are important in order for erosion to do something useful. If you have a fairly flat terrain, it's not going to give me much of what I want, which is lots of little moving flow lines. But another way that you can do it, and I've combined two of them here, is actually adding a gradient to it. So just blending it with a linear gradient goes ahead and puts a slight hill to it. So I just adjusted, set it to screen, and got it to get sort of like a downwards flow. What this will do is the erosion will flow in this downward direction. Without it, erosion, you notice, isn't doing as much. I set them both to linear so they're a little bit faster, but ultimately they're pretty much the same default settings. So there's a lot less happening here. So this downward slope erosion is giving me longer flowing lines, and this one's giving me a few just kind of related to the existing gravity. Now I don't use either one of these shapes outside of the fact that I want to pull out the wear and the flow from either one of them. So just so we can see what they're producing, I've got them plugged into some constants here, so you can see what's going on. It's a good way to help you visualize it as a shape, as opposed to just white and black, right? Just the actual lines. Those lines can be useful, but sometimes it's useful to see the actual physical depth that they represent, and just how rough some of this can be. So I'm mixing them together. So the flow lines always have a little bit extra, but they're there, and there's slightly different things in either one. If we go to this one, for example, you see lots of tiny little lines, but you go to the lines of flow, and there's much bigger ones. So I combine them together and get a balance of them. It's just a 50-50 blend between both of them. And then I combine those together with a 50-50 blend, so I get this final version, this blend of really steep, because when we switch between them you see there's different lines, different crevices, different places, so I want the combination of those. It's going to give me lots of variety and breakup. I'm going to auto level those to get the maximum out of them. And then I'm going to do something funky. Right now, if I use them as is, it's just going to do lines. They're just going to cut into it. It's look like weird shaped cracks. If I added some more irregularity, some more sharpness to the bends to them, maybe it might look like actual fracturing. But in this particular case, they just kind of look odd. So I want to round out the grooves that they're creating for me. So in order to do this, I've passed it through a blur at different levels. So I've got a 50%, I've got a 25%, and I've got a 13%. And I combine those together, 50-50 and 50-50. And what this does is, you notice everything sort of softens out. So I'm going between my shape, which I brought down a little bit. So it was, if you recall, quite a bit taller. So by passing it through a constant, I bring it down a little bit. It's a little bit smoother. I needed the height for the erosion. I don't need the height for this final version. So I'm combining with these things that are cutting into it in a subtraction. And there we go. By softening it and by carving into it, I get this interesting kind of broke up terrain. Everything's a little bit close together. You've got these big sort of river lines. It's kind of neat. So if this is all you wanted to do, you could then apply an erosion on it, set it to linear, turn off aggressive mode, and that would give you some fairly decent grassy hills. But I wanted to go a little bit further with that. So I do go ahead and erode it with aggressive mode off, and you can see what that's produced, right? It's really nice. Put some green on there. Good to go. But I wanted to take those eroded lines and go further with them. So what do they look like? They look like this. So this one is probably more interesting than the other, but I'm taking them and I'm running them through a displacement, breaking them up, because I don't want them to be directly related to what's here. I want them to be a little bit more random. So I'm using standard displacement in both these cases, and then combining them back together. So the displacement creates even more variation within these two, because they're offset from each other. Before they would have been aligned, at least slightly, because they're based on the original shape, but these two different displacements break them up and I get lots more variety off of them. I'm then doing the same thing as I did before, going through here, 50%, 25%, and 13%. Combine, combine. But this time, I still want a little bit of that small one, so I've come straight off the original and brought them in. You might also notice that I've done something a little bit different here, in that I really wanted them to add to each other. So I went 100% to add, and then for that last little bit, then I go the 50% blend. If I went 50, 50, 50 all the way down, I lose a lot of the detail. So in this particular case, because I'm going on a longer combined chain, I chose to add them first and then blend them in. So you notice it's branching off here. We'll look at that in a second. First thing is, I'm taking it off the eroded surface. So I went from this to erosion. It's going to fill in some areas. It's going to change the shapes. It's interesting. And I'm going to cut into it again. So if you notice now, that breakup is a lot more complex. There's a lot more going on. Combined with the erosion that's originally there, we get a much more aged looking terrain. I've also combined it with the original, the uneroded details coming off of this. So these ones combined with these ones, because I wanted to do another erosion. So I'll do the next erosion. What it does is it ages the terrain even further but the sediment fills in all the little grooves that I've created over this timeline. So I wanted all of those grooves back in, and I wanted to be able to control their depth. So it's just taking all the ones I did before combining them in, all the new ones that I've added, combining those in, setting them to max so that I get 100% of both of them. They're overlapping each other. And then subtracting them, and I've gone about 50% here, which is the default, but you can choose to do more or less depending on what you want. So here's where things are going to get kind of interesting. I've got a nice aged terrain again. This again is more of an aggressive sort of look. So if I were to blend this with, say, this earlier version, this would be the grass covered areas. Where this would be the areas where dirt was kind of exposed and much stronger erosion. The key difference between these two is, of course, that the dirt is more movable. It's easy to erode from rain, whereas the grass kind of knits together and it holds strong and has more of a smooth look. Of course, you'd be covering it with actual blades of grass that would be there. So from a distance, it'll look fairly soft at this scale. So by using creative masking, you would be able to mask in some areas that were smoother and some that were more rough and eroded. And the break of that you'd see the lips of the, where the grass was still there, still clinging, holding on, and then the sudden fall off into this eroded dirt, which is interesting. I chose to take a slightly different route in this particular turn because I wanted to do something mixing this deeper erosion with something more. So running an apex at 25%, it starts usually at 10, so I brought it up to 25, and it gives me this. So we're going from this to this. It's picking out the real high points and it's trying to do something with it, just to get those raised areas. And you still keep some of the details, but it definitely flattens out some regions. Then took it and ran a displace on it to give me, and this is a rugged displace, and to give me a lot of extra detail to run an erosion on. So by processing that, I get lots of details. And these are cool. We'll auto level, adjust how far it's pushing it up. So I'm only using a small amount of the auto level. I just want it to be a little bit taller. And then combining them with a blend. So again, I've gone from this to this. And I can choose how much of that I want. I don't have to use all of it. But I wanted to keep a lot of those rough hills, sorry, some rough hills and some details. But I did want to bring in that majorly eroded mountain element. So this quick solution there was just set it to max and bring it in. And because it's based off this other one, the seam is a little bit less noticeable than it would have been. So now I've got this nice big massive eroded mound. I've got all these nice little greenery areas, and it's working fairly nicely. This is when it goes a little bit crazy. So if you've been watching this far, great. We've covered sort of building into the complex terrain aspect, but a lot of this here is just producing the color. So in order to produce the color and to get some decent color, you have to go through a lot of different stages. You either borrow from existing images and you get the complexity from that, or you have to play quite a bit. So this is what I do. I almost never use something straight off as is. And there's always a little bit of a plan, but the first part of it is always looking for creating lots of detail, lots of chaos to build my base textures, because the base colors, they need chaos to exist. They need chaos to give them something interesting. In order to then get to the final stage, that's when I start to exhibit control. So the first part is just, let's get some interesting shapes. So let's see what things I can get. I went with flow, brought the rain cycles up a little bit, and that gives me some areas of flow throughout here. So you can see all these, the steeper slopes, of course, are going to be a bit sharper, and these other ones are going to be a little bit looser. I'm also using a surfacer, which if you've looked at the beginner's video on the surfacer, it's got many different modes. Trace is here, which is similar to contour, kind of inverted. Set the strength all the way up, and that means that we're getting lots of focus on the little regions here, the parts that are sticking out. So it's hard to see in this situation. You can kind of see it hitting this ridge here and this ridge here. So there is a lot of detail. You're just not really seeing it because it just looks like it's adding to the shape. That's because the surface is so complex, but it's there. And I combined it with screen 100% with those slow lines. That gives me enough variation that I can run it through texture. So once you run it through texture, you can actually see all the variation was there. So it wasn't super visible before, but now you can really see it, right? So there's lots and lots of little details going all the way through it. I combine that back with the original, and it's a 50-50 blend. And that gives me enough for sat maps to be able to pick up and detail. So this is one pass of greenery. So I'm using 23 here. It's got areas of dirt and breakups, greens and lighter and darker greens. And so this is my underlayer. This is between the main grass texture and the dirt that I'm going to be applying here. This is where it's all kind of breaking up. There's, you know, little regions. So we're going to use a little bit of that. I am taking it off to do something else, but we're going to get back to that for the dirt layer. So that's one grass layer. I'm also going through using a slope here, which I use a few different times. I'm combining it with a soil, and I've got another slope. These different slopes are different values so that I can get more breakup, and I use more slope elements later on to break it up even further. So the first pass is just the slope and soil combined together, 50-50 blend, and then I run that through a soil as well, which gives me lots of chaos. I also use this directly. So you see lots of detail there. So soil, combine, brought it down so that this is adding only a tiny amount. Run that through a sat maps, and that gives me my next green. So this is top layer green. And what's interesting with this one, which is 5, is it's got these little areas of sort of light dirt, sandy elements throughout the space. So under layer green, upper layer green. Now it's a little bit dark, so going through color effects, I go ahead, apply HSL, and I brighten it up, and that's working. So remember that slope. I go in with a height as well, just to allow it to focus the upper layer green, and then it transitions to the lower layer green. So we start to get it to go more and more in those regions, and then also as it goes to elevations above a certain area, the grass has difficulty. So it stops there. So I've got this range. Combine those together, multiply, and then adjust the values how I like it. Just again, it's just trying to break it up a little bit more. So you get some little bits of it here and there, just because I want the terrain to be broken up. So we're going between underlayer, upper layer, broken up with that mask, and you can see it there. So we get some of these little eroded lines, and still keep some of these other elements here, some of the pockets of dirt. It's looking pretty nice. Now I'm not quite done with it though. I want another layer of complexity to the values that are here. So I went back to this flow and run it through a clutter and brought that down. So you can see what it's doing. That flow alone is producing all of this. So this lovely green, look at here, you can see where that is, just sitting above the yellow, and that's right next to the blue here. And what I'm doing with that is I'm taking it and blending it as a multiply 100%. So what that's doing is creating some darker regions while maintaining some of the lighter regions. It's enriching the greenness that is in there, just adding complexity. And it's still not enough complexity. I still want to work that green even further. So now I want to start playing with this sort of random pockets of more browny, more green, darker, more saturated, those kinds of things. So my first pass is to go a little bit more in the brown region. So HSL, move the hue, adjust the saturation a little bit, and then using a Perlin noise set to billowy and then auto leveled to get the maximum out. So I'm getting from 0 to 1 values. I go ahead and mix those. So from here to here. So you see those little brown regions kind of creeping in. It's all broken up. It's nice. The billowy gives us a nice transition, so it's kind of soft as opposed to the default Perlin, which is more rigid. So the next thing is to then take that and process again to get more saturation. So that more saturation, I run through yet another Perlin. And again, auto level it. And going from this to this. So some areas will become more saturated, some will be lighter. So desaturation, more saturation in this area, and so on. So it's layered through. So again, we've gone from this to this. Lots of detail, lots of variation. Perfect. Okay, so now what? Well, now we have to go through our dirt. So the dirt layer is here. And the dirt layer is coming off of this here, which gives me lots of variation. Displace it a little bit. We're using rugged, very small scale, very small strength. I just want to shift it a little bit. I want a little bit of variation on it. I don't want it to be perfectly aligned to the shape. Just a little bit of offset. And what it's being used for is actually to multiply on top. So it's giving me kind of a reddy brown. It's in the orange region here. It's dark brown. And then of course the white, because that's the area that I don't want to multiply. So that's coming off of this soil this soil. Combine those together, you see what kind of variation I've got from here. So this is coming off the slope, combined, then soil, and lots of complexity and minimal complexity. The two together gives me lots of details. I've got them set to difference, and this just really gives me a nice breakup. Run a sat maps through that, and we get a fair bit of variation. So I went with 50 here. It's got some dark regions and some light regions. You can see the cracks and breakups and stuff like that, stuff being picked out. But again, it wasn't enough. So I combine it with this as a multiply to get a little bit more, some dark wet soil to some lighter dried out soil, and gives me some nice breakup. So there's my soil, there's my grass. I need to bring them together. I need a way to come in and put them there, and I could just go with just a slope as is, that would be fine, but it's not enough. I actually want the slope to be one of the primary rules, but I also want additional breakup through this surface. Areas that have just, maybe a boulder was just a bit too heavy and it tore away and brought out a big chunk of grass with it, just nature in general, right? It's chaotic. So we build this mask. So coming off the original shape, we have our original slope. We have our soil and this other soil. We combine them, subtraction instead of difference in this particular case. Over here, this is difference, this is subtraction. So combined with this slope, and I've just added it to it. Also using height information to get it out of this lower region here. Break up. Boom. And I've got this thing set to clip because I was noticing some values kind of jumping on me. So whenever it looks like you're getting values that maybe the math is just going above or below values that you want, you can just add a clip. So it's just clamp mode set to clip. So I did mention I had an additional slope. So this additional slope is really extreme. This is where heavy breakup comes in. So feeding it through these, and I went through the mixer. Initially, I went through a combine node, and for some odd reason, even with the clip, it still kept on giving me the wrong result. So if that ever happens to you, one of the solutions sometimes is just going through a mixer. It's also the same sort of math settings, but sometimes it just performs a little bit differently. So I may have hit some kind of almost unseen bug. I'm not sure what it was, but this was my solution. So a clutter node, another clutter node, just the defaults, just keeps it as black and white data, run it through the mixer instead. And this is being run through a Perlin noise. The key thing with this Perlin noise is it is set super small. So I've got lots of octaves, I set the scale. It's billowy just like the other ones. And yeah, auto level again to get the maximum out of it. And so I'm mixing between this, and bang. Lots of variation all throughout there. Now I'm keeping the gradient aspect that's coming off of that, but I'm going to actually do something with it. So after I've run it through this Rgb split, and the reason why it's going through the Rgb split is that I can output a single channel. If I want to push it through the height, it has to be single channel. I can't just come out of a color, plug it into the height and go. So the height, what it's going to do is kind of like levels. So we're not seeing the result. There we go. So it's giving me weird results. That's okay. We'll see it in the final mask. So while it was all this mid-gray area, the height actually, when I was playing with it, what it did is allowed me to choose the breakup region. So while I was building it, I could see it on this terrain. I'm not sure why it's freaking out right now, but probably because everybody's watching and they're recording. So it allowed me to take like these gray areas and bring them to white and just allow little pockets throughout here. So you can see that through here, the areas that I chose, and I just chose the values that I liked. So for me, the height was bringing it out to about midway and adjusting that fall off so it wasn't too smooth, but allowing for a little bit of transition. And those give me those nice little torn areas. Plus it's based off the other original slope and height information, so it's all in there. Well, I hope you've enjoyed watching this complex scene breakdown. The initial techniques are here for the sort of grassland mounds if you want to make those things. Running it through an apex is also kind of an interesting part of the process, and hopefully you have some ideas. I'll see you in the next video.